Now to breaking news out of the Melrose argument takes a violent turn. Jennifer Bizram live in the Melrose section with more. Jen.
You see behind me right now, still a crime scene at this hour. Crime scene investigators just arrived to the scene, as well as detectives. They have been combing this area, looking for surveillance video, talking to witnesses.
The LAPD today released body camera video of an officer-involved shooting last month. The suspect got away.
Multiple people injured in 3 separate shootings, and police are working to figure out if they are all connected in any way.
In today's video, we're going to be speaking about somebody from Schoolyard who would be accused of shooting 3 people in a matter of 4 months, and how during one of them shootings, an officer would be present and an officer would return fire at him. We're also going to cover how his victims would be from BPS, Rollin' 20s, and Playboy Gangsta. But let's get into it. We're going to start off with the first situation, which would happen on September 16th of 2017. In this situation would happen at Holiday Liquor Store, which was on the corner of West Adams Boulevard and La Brea Avenue. This store would be a block south of the Schoolyard territory, but they would say it would be located in the West Boulevard territory. And just so there's no confusion in the story, we're going to address Marielle, who would be from Schoolyard, as Double M. And on the day of September 16th of 2017, police would get a call saying that somebody was inside that corner store chasing somebody else with a firearm. But when police arrived, the suspect and victim were nowhere to be found. However, police did pull surveillance video from the store, and they would see Double M chasing John Doe around the store with a black and silver firearm. And in the video, police didn't know who he was. That's why they addressed him as John Doe. However, one day before the situation, on September 15th of 2017, police would learn that a Schoolyard Crip member was murdered in their territory, and that person would be Christopher Schuler Jr. He would lose his life at 24 years old on the 2300 block of South Cochran Avenue, and it's alleged that him and a group of people were outside partying when an argument broke out around 11 o'clock at night. A person in that group ended up pulling out a firearm and shooting him, and somebody named James Shepard, who was 30 years old at the time, would be arrested 3 days after the murder on September 18th. This right here would be Holiday Liquors, and as you can see right here, it would be about 5 minutes away from 2300 South Cochran Avenue, where James Schuler Jr. lost his life. But like we said, even though they had surveillance video, they still wouldn't know who Double M was or the victim. And since nobody was shot, I'm assuming the police weren't really pursuing it. However, a few weeks later, on October 14th of 2017, Marielle, aka Double M, would get into another situation. And this time, it was at Hot Wings Cafe, located on Melrose Avenue. And this situation would happen around 11:15 at night. Him and his girlfriend were out to eat. That's when about 10 minutes later, 3 cars would pull into the parking lot across the street. And out of them 3 vehicles, 7 people would get out and walk across the street. They would all sit in front of Hot Wings Cafe and talk amongst each other. That's when 2 people out of the group would enter inside a Hot Wings Cafe. They would then see Double M and his girlfriend sitting and eating, and they would approach and hug his girlfriend and speak to her. The 2 men would then go pay for their food, and then they would go back outside. And when the 2 men went back outside, they would tell the rest of the group that somebody from Schoolyard was inside. And it's alleged that the group was from Playboy Gangsters. That's when somebody named Michael James would walk in, and he would walk past the table, and him and Double M would have a stare down. And after a few minutes, Double M and his girlfriend would get up and attempt to leave. But as they got to the door, the group of men would confront him. They would then get into an argument, and the group of men would say F Schoolyard. Double M would then lift up his shirt and show the group a firearm. Then he would ask them what they're trying to do. They would then all scatter in different directions, but surveillance video would show Michael James, who was the one that he had a stare down with inside a Hot Wings Cafe, would run to the parking lot, and he would grab a firearm. Michael James would then open fire on Double M and his girlfriend, but he wouldn't hit anything. He would then jump in his BMW and drive away. But like we said, there were 7 people and 3 cars, and they all scattered in separate directions. But somebody named Ryan Beverly, who was in the group of 7, he would run back to Hot Wings Cafe. But then after about a minute, 2 other people out that group would enter Hot Wings Cafe, and they would sit and laugh with security and say that it was fireworks. But with them thinking everything was okay and that Double M left the scene, They would then return to outside of Hot Wings Cafe, and they would congregate in front of it again. But little did they know that Double M and his girlfriend actually parked a few blocks down, and that they were running to the vehicle. But once Double M got back to the vehicle, he would decide to drive back down Melrose, and he would tell his girlfriend to lay down in the back. That's when he would pull back up in front of Hot Wings Cafe, and he would roll down the window and open fire on the group, hitting Beverly in the leg. No arrest would be made in the situation, but police would gather surveillance footage and showcasing evidence. But now we're going to move on to the next shooting, which would happen a month later on November 15th of 2017. This one would happen on the corner of 27th Street and 7th Avenue. And this location would be in the heart of the BPS Biddy Stones. And the shooting happened at 12:30 in the afternoon. And it's alleged that Double M and his girlfriend were driving in the BPS hood when they would see 7 people standing on that corner, and he would tell her to pull over. He would then jump out the vehicle and open fire about 6 times on the group. He would then hit somebody named Tion Cooper in the hand and in the leg. He would then run back to the vehicle and jump in, and they would drive away. And the same results would happen from this shooting. They wouldn't make an arrest, but they would collect evidence, and they would say that they recovered 8 .40 caliber casings. And now we're going to move on to the next shooting, which would probably be the craziest one. This one would happen a month later, on December 4th of 2017. And on that day, a Rolling 20 Bloods member was walking home from school. That's when Double M and his girlfriend would see him. Double M would notice that he was wearing a Louis Vuitton backpack, and he would jump out the vehicle. He would then ask him where he was from, and Nelson, who was the victim, would respond and say that he was from Bloods, but he didn't bang. Double M would then pull out a firearm and say a disrespectful word for the Rolling 20 Bloods. He would then open fire, and he would hit Nelson in the back and in the leg. But this is where things get even crazier, because when he fired the first 3 shots, there was an LAPD officer working in the area, and he would hear the 3 shots, and he would pull up. And as he was driving up to the scene, he would see Double M holding a gun, and he would see him chasing another person. He would then hear 2 more shots. The officer would then jump out his vehicle and yell at Double M to stop. That's when Double M would grab the Louis Vuitton backpack, and he would attempt to run back to the vehicle. The officer then fired 3 shots at Double M, but he would miss them all. That's when Double M would jump back in the vehicle, and they would take off. The officer would then stay to help the victim, but he would get a description of the vehicle, the license plate, and the shooter. They would then collect all the shell casings, and they would run them through the database, and they would see if it came back to any other shootings in the area. That's when they would find out that the .40 caliber came back to the November 15th shooting and the shooting outside of Hot Wings. So that right there let them know that all 3 shootings were connected and the same gun was used. He wouldn't be arrested until December 28th of 2017 though, which would be 3 weeks after the situation happened. And I'm not too sure why, but at first they would charge him with 1 count of murder. I'm not too sure if this was a mistake, and maybe the court meant attempted murder, but I don't see how they would make that mistake. So I'm going to assume that they thought the person wasn't going to make it, and he might have been in a coma or something like that. Because eventually, they did change it to an attempted murder. But let's go down the rest of these counts. He was also charged with 3 counts of shooting from a vehicle, 1 count of assault with a firearm on a person, 2 counts of possession of a firearm by a felon, 1 count of willfully discharging a firearm in a negligent manner, 2 counts of attempted murder, 2 counts of assaulting a person with a firearm, 1 count of robbery, and 2 more counts of possession of a firearm by a felon. And as you can see to the left, it would be a total of 15 counts. But 3 months after he was arrested, his girlfriend would be arrested on March 5th of 2018. And they would charge her for 2 counts of attempted murder, 2 counts of assaulting a person with a semi-automatic firearm, and 1 count of second-degree robbery. They would both have to sit in the county jail for a few months, but on October 11th of 2018, she would bail out for $100,000. But after sitting in the county for almost 2 years, Double M would start trial on May 3rd of 2019. And during the trial, the victim from BPS that he shot did not testify, and neither did any of the Playboy gangsters. But unfortunately, for Double M, his girlfriend would, and she would testify in exchange for a plea agreement. And during the trial, they would also play a phone call between Double M and his brother, who was incarcerated at the time. And during that jail phone call, they would have a recording of him bragging about the shooting, saying that they cracked on him and he cracked back. In this phone call, took place just days after the Hot Wings shooting in October. They would also have search results of his girlfriend searching up the Louis Vuitton bag that they stole to see how much it was. And they would also find out that the vehicle they were looking for, which would be a Chevy Malibu, was a rental. And they would find out on December 16th of 2017 that his mother returned it to Hertz. And in exchange for that statement, she would be convicted after a plea, but she would have every other count dismissed and she would only take a plea deal on the attempted murder, to where they would only give her 5 years of probation. Double M was then convicted by a jury on May 16th of 2019. And as you can see, count 1, like we said, they ended up changing the murder to an attempted murder, and he would be found guilty on that count. And they would also find him guilty on the other 2 attempted murder counts. He would also be found guilty on count 2, which was shooting from a motor vehicle, and he would also be found guilty on assault with a firearm on a person and possession of a firearm by a felon, where he would receive a total of 291 years to life. But that right there is going to wrap up the story of Double M from Schoolyard, and I appreciate y'all for tuning in. But comment, like, and subscribe. It's Respectable Rants.